Hey, good evening, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. I'm in a bit of a different environment here, and so hopefully this is working okay. Can I get a confirmation that you guys are able to hear me okay? Loud and clear. Perfect. Awesome. I'm at home and my internet here is not as good as my office, so I'm hoping that the connection continues to be clear. If it's not, feel free to, like, if you can't hear me at all during the lecture, feel free to just chat and say, hey, we can't hear you, and I'll try to see what's going on. But it should be good enough. Anyway, welcome to the last day of class, guys. And I'm so happy to have you here. I know that it's a Friday night and that you probably wish you were out hanging out with people, but we're going to do some cool stuff today, learning about table views, and which are super important because pretty much any app you've ever used uses a table view. So we're going to go through the basics of table views. Also, for those who are preparing for the full-time course, this is also going to be part of your assessment, is knowing how to do table views. So as it is our last day of class, I do want to throw out another pitch for any of those who are thinking about the full-time course. The process is pretty easy. You can go and apply online at lambdaschool.com, and from there you'll send in your application, then you'll have an interview to see if you're a good fit, and then there will also be an assessment or a code challenge. And what we've covered in this course should have prepared you quite well for that assessment, so you can feel confident going into it, that you've learned the things that you would need to know. Any other questions about Lambda School or how it works, how the full-time works, before we move forward with today? Okay, very good. Well, as I said, again, this is our last day. We've covered quite a bit over these last 2 weeks. We've covered the basics of Xcode. We've done a lot of different things in Swift, learning about optionals and conditionals and creating constants and creating classes. And so kind of we're going to bring it all together tonight in creating this table view. We won't use everything that we've learned, but we'll definitely cover quite a bit of it. Now I had a question come through. Is Lambda School only open to the US? I believe that they do accept international on occasion. I know that it's a little bit more difficult because of time zones, and Lambda School is, it's still live instruction even though it's online. And so I know that the time zone could probably be a little difficult because you may be required to stay up all night. But it's still worth applying. If it's definitely something that you want to do and you're a good fit, then definitely give it a shot and take the course. And I think if you can stay awake in the middle of the night and work with your peers and with your PMs and whatnot, then it should be okay. But definitely apply for sure. Okay, so table views. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you here. And let's share this desktop. Okay. Alrighty, so going into table views, let me show you what we're going to build today. So I have my simulator up right now that is showing us the finished project of what we're going to talk about today, okay? So this is just going to be a very, very simple table view of contacts. So you guys probably worked on a contacts app last night, but we're going to go into how we can create a contacts app here with a list of our different contacts, and then you'll also be able to tap on one of those contacts and see a detailed view. I understand that's not very detailed. Remember, we're doing the very basics of a table view today, because I don't want to overwhelm you with too much. But this is essentially the structure of the app that we're going to be building today. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get started with a new Xcode project. Okay, so I'm going to open up Xcode here, File, New, and I'm going to do a new project. Let me bring this over here. Okay, and again, when we're starting with a new project, you'll see a list of templates. Personally, I have never used any of these templates before besides the single view application. Single view, again, is just really nice because it allows us to just kind of start from scratch, and so we know everything that's set up. Whereas, you know, these AR, the games, they'll give you kind of some cookie cutter code that you can uncomment and implement. But for our purposes today, it's just easier to start with a single view application. So let's go ahead and click next here, and we're going to give this a name. Let's call it Contacts App. And then you're going to select your team name if you have one, which you most likely don't. And your bundle identifier, it should just be a reverse URL notation. So it should be COM and then your organization identifier, and then the name of your application. Again, we're going to be using Swift today, not Objective-C, so make sure that the language selected is Swift. And if any of these are checked, go ahead and uncheck them because we're not going to be using core data or unit tests today. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next here, and we'll just go ahead and save it to wherever you want, wherever the other projects that you've been working on are. Okay, and here we are at the beginning of our project. So you'll see that in the single view application, Apple has created a view controller for us and a main.storyboard. Okay, and I always like to start in the storyboard because it's a lot more interesting to me to think about how this is going to look visually and then write code afterwards. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start in our storyboard today. And before I forget, let me change my preferences here so that you guys can all see. Just change this to presentation here so it's easier for you guys to see my code. Okay. Alrighty, so we're going to be starting in the storyboard today, and Apple has given us this view controller. Now I said that we're going to be using a table view controller, and this is just a plain view controller. So let's go ahead and let's actually just delete this because I want to start from scratch. So you can either select it here, and you should be able to delete, or if you select it here in this table and hit delete, that will clean it off as well. Okay, so now we have a blank storyboard. Okay, so let's talk about table views. So table views, like I said, are common in pretty much every app that you've ever used. Maybe not a game that might omit a table view, unless it has like a settings page, then it probably has a table view. But table views are all over the place. And table views are really nice because they give us a really easy way to present a list of data. So it could be contacts, it could be your text messages, a list of settings. Really, it's the easiest way to present a list of something and also to allow users to interact with it, whether they tap on a specific row, or they swipe on that row, or they're scrolling through a bunch of rows. Table views are what's managing all of that, managing those user interactions. And so a table view controller is a view controller that has a table on it, and the table takes up the full screen. Okay, so you can set up table views onto a view controller. So if I had my view controller like Apple had given us here, then you'll see that if we filter through our objects, there is a table view object, and I could drag that onto my view controller. But the implementation is a little bit more difficult than if we were just to do like a straight table view controller, which Apple actually provides for us. So table view controllers are so common that Apple has actually provided this object here in our object library to just create a table view controller, okay? So again, I'm gonna get rid of this view controller because we don't need it. And go ahead and filter on your object list here for table, and then you should see an option here for table view controller. And select that and go ahead and drag it into your storyboard, okay? So here we have a table view controller. Now, something to remember when you do delete the original view controller, every app needs to have like a starting place, an entry point that's called our initial view controller. And when Apple puts the view controller in there for you, it's set as the initial view controller. But when you delete it, it also removes the marker that says that this is the initial view controller. So we need to make sure that we set our table view as our initial view controller so that as soon as our app launches, the app knows what storyboard to go to first. So if I select my table view controller and then I look over here in my attributes inspector, you'll see this checkbox here that says is initial view controller, okay? And so the table view, like I showed you in our example here, our table view is going to be our initial view controller. So go ahead and check that box, okay? So we're gonna set this as our initial view controller. And then you'll see here now that there's a little arrow pointing to it, and this arrow just means this is your initial view controller, okay? So here we have a table view controller, and you can see that we've got these prototype cells. And so if I click on it, you've got a table view cell here, okay? So now, if you look through the list of different attributes you can throw in your table view cell, one really important thing is going to be a reuse identifier, okay? And this is really nice because we're not going to create a new cell for each of our different contacts because all of the cells are exactly the same, right? They're just a name, okay? So this reuse identifier will allow us to reuse the same templated cell as we set up our table view, okay? So let's go ahead and we're gonna give this cell an identifier and let's just call it contact cell, okay? Contact cell. And so that is the identifier for that cell. Now, if we wanna continue to set up a template just to see what this is gonna look like, you can see here that we can set up the cell style, okay? And these are common styles that you'll see in table views. So right now it's set to custom, but if I set it to basic, you'll see that a basic cell type just gives you one word right here. And we can put in a title here. And that's probably what we're going to be using, right? Because we just want to display a name. So we're just going to have a basic cell type. But let's go ahead and let's go through some of the other options here. So there's also a right detail, which gives you some data to the left of the cell and some data to the right. We also have left detail. This one's not super common, but again, it kind of puts everything over to the left. And then we have subtitle, which is really nice. This is pretty similar to what you'd see in like messages, would be like the title, which would be like the name of who the message is from. And then the detail is going to be like part of the message that you can see, right? But let's go ahead, and the style that we're going to use today is going to be basic. Okay, and then we can go ahead and we can replace this. It doesn't really matter what it says, but just so that we know this is going to be displaying contact. So I'll just change this to Johnny Hicks so that I know, okay, we're going to be looking at names throughout this table view, okay? Alrighty, so now we have a table view. Let's take a look at our finished project and see what else we need, okay? So we're also going to need a detail view controller, right? A place that can house the name as we move over, okay? So let's go ahead and let's drag a new view controller in here. And so I'll go ahead and search UI view controller, and we'll drag that in here next to my table view controller. Okay, so now I've got a table view controller and a UI view controller. Okay, so that's kind of our template or our structure of what we're going to need for our application today. So let's put the UI view controller aside for a second, and our table view controller, okay? So when Apple gave in the template that we opened initially, we were given a view controller and the view controller on the storyboard, right? And the way that those were connected, right? We have the storyboard was connected to the view controller file, but now that view controller is gone, this view controller.swift file that Apple gave us isn't connected to anything. So we don't actually need it anymore because we deleted the view controller that it was associated with it on our storyboard. So let's go ahead and let's delete our view controller here because we don't need it, and let's move it to the trash, okay? So now what we need to do is we need to create a file, a code file that our table view can connect to, okay? So over here, I'm going to push Command N, which means like new file, or you could go to File, New, File as well. So either one. So I'll do Command N. And in the past, we've been using different Swift files. But what we're going to do is we're going to be using a Cocoa Touch class. And so these are the different class files that I'm creating a new class. I'm creating a table view controller class. So that's going to be in our Cocoa Touch class template. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next here. And then it's going to ask me what class is this controller? And this is more so just what's the name of our view controller. And it's a subclass of what? Okay, so remember we talked about classes and subclasses. So let's go ahead and let's call this our contact view controller. Okay, don't hit next yet because this isn't a subclass of UI view controller. This is a table view controller, right? So I can go ahead and I can change this to be UI table view controller. And then you'll see that as you change that subclass, it will actually change your class name to be table view controller, just so that it's clear that it is a table view controller class, okay? So then we'll go ahead and we'll hit next here and go ahead and create that file. And then you'll see up here in the project navigator that we have our contacts table view controller. And now we've got our main.storyboard, and we actually need to go in now and we need to connect our table view controller to this contacts table view controller so that we have our visual element connected with our programmatic element, okay? So let's go ahead and I'm going to go back into my main.storyboard, make sure that you've selected your table view controller. And then if you click on this identity inspector here, this will allow us to set the class on our table view controller. Okay, so if I click on that, you'll see that the class right now is just a UI table view controller, just a basic UI table view controller, but it's not actually connected to our contact table view controller that we created, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to connect it by calling contact table view controller, and it should auto-populate there for you. If you set up a table view controller class correctly, you should see that as one of the options as you start typing. So now I'll go ahead and hit enter, and now our visual element of our table view controller is connected to this Swift file of table view controller. Okay, is everyone with me thus far? Is everyone able to get that all connected? Awesome job. Okay, cool guys. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at what Apple has given us in our contact table view controller. Okay, so one really nice thing about those Cocoa Touch class files is that Apple will give us a little bit of cookie cutter code that's pretty common to each instance of that type of class, right? And so we could create Swift files for all of this and write all of the code, but the Cocoa Touch class files are really nice because it will do a lot of the work for us. Okay, so let's inspect this for just a second. Okay, so we can see that Apple imported UI kit for us, which is nice because that's what we'll need as we're setting up our visual interface elements, right? And it created a new class for us. Okay, so it declared a class of contact table view controller, and it's a subclass of UI table view controller. And so remember, because it's a subclass, it gets all of the built-in properties and methods that a UI table view controller would have, right? But we can now add our own little custom piece to it, okay? So let's take a look at some of these things that they've given us. So we've got view-did-load, which is any kind of setup that we want to do as soon as the controller loads, okay? So for now, we don't need anything in there, but make sure that you keep it. I just got rid of the commented out code. Did receive memory warning. We're not going to use. I've actually never used it in an app before. It's usually always provided for us, but I've never had to use it. So go ahead and get rid of that. And we're just kind of cleaning up our code now so that we have a really basic template of what we're going to need, okay? So you'll see next here we have a table view data source, okay? So this is one really cool thing about setting up table view controllers is that they're automatically connected to a table view data source. And these table view data source methods is what helps us set up our table, okay? So we've got this first function here, which is number of sections. So today we're not going to be creating different sections in our table view. It's just going to be one section. And the default is actually one section if we don't have this code. So go ahead and get rid of the number of sections because we don't need that function, okay? But there are two required data source methods that we have to implement with every table view, okay? And sections is not one of them, as I deleted it, you saw that. But number of rows in section is one of them, okay? So the table view has to know how many rows am I going to be setting up on this table view, okay? If it doesn't know that, then it can't build the table view for us, okay? So this is a required data source method, okay? The next required data source method, and it may not look required because it's commented out, but it's going to be this one right here. So I'm gonna uncomment this by getting rid of the * on the top and the bottom. And you'll see that it's this cell for row at index path, okay? So we've got number of rows in section, and there's only one section, so total number of rows. And then we have this cell for row at, which is essentially saying, okay, so I know the number of rows that I have, or that I need to create, but what do those rows need to look like? What content do they need to contain? Okay, so you can think of cell for row at as the visual appearance of the cell, and then number of rows in section is just the number of those different cells, okay? And I just had a question come through of what a section is. So if you actually open up the Contacts app, if you have an iPhone, I assume you have an iPhone if you're taking this class, but if you open up the Contacts app, and let's see, I probably can't even show it. You'll see that you have your list of contacts, but above each contact section is like A or B or C or D. See? So those are different sections in our table view that we're separating our contacts alphabetically by letter, right? And so in the Contacts app on your iPhone, the sections are going to be last name or first letter of the last name. And then each of those sections has a specific number of rows, okay? So that is what a section is, but again, we have one section. We're not gonna separate anything into sections here. So I don't need to implement the section data source method because it defaults to one, okay? So we've got these two data source methods, number of rows in section, and then our cell for row at, which is essentially saying, configuring the cell, or what does the cell look like, okay? So first off, let's think about our data source, or in the number of rows in section. How are we gonna tell this how many rows that it needs, okay? Well, first we need to set up a data source of contacts, right? And we're just gonna do this really simply here in this contact table view controller. Let's go ahead and let's create an array, okay? And so let's do variable contacts array. And this is gonna be an array of type string, okay? And let's set it equal to, and let's give some contact names, okay? So I'll put myself in it, Johnny Hicks. Let's see, let's do Christopher. I'm gonna steal some of your guys' names that have been chatting in, okay? We've got Noah, we've got Jonathan, probably not gonna say this right, but Boss Bank, and let's do Shalita here, okay? Alrighty, so this is a list of all of the contacts that I'm gonna have in my application, at least for now, okay? So I've got my contacts array. So now I need to tell my table view how many rows I need, okay? Well, let's go ahead and clear out that code. And instead of returning 0 here, I want to give it a certain number, okay? So we could say, okay, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 6 contacts. So I could go ahead and I could return 6 right here. But this is not a great way to do this because it's not going to be dynamic, right? Let's say my array changes and I add a new contact. It's only going to create rows for 6 of my contacts and it's going to leave someone out, okay? So what you can do here is I can call my contacts array, and then if we use dot notation, you'll see that they give us a nifty little method called count, okay? I guess it's more like a computed property, but we have count, okay? So this is always going to return the number of objects that I have inside of my array, okay? And that's perfect for what I need because I want to have the same number of rows as I do contacts, okay? So there we go. We've implemented our first data source method, which is our number of rows in section, and we're gonna take the count of objects inside of our array, okay? Is everyone with me thus far? We're all good, all good. Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and let's talk about how to implement our next data source method, which is what do the cells look like, okay? So I know how many cells I need to create, but what are they going to look like, okay? So let's go ahead and look through this code and you'll see that the cookie cutter code gave us a cell, which is good because this is going to be cell for row at, right? So we're gonna have a cell property, and then it says table view DQ reusable cell, okay? So this DQ reusable cell is really nice because most table views, although they may look different, are using the same 4 or 5 cells, but they're just recycling them, right? So if you have a table view that fits, or let's say you have an iPhone and you see 5 table view cells on it, when you scroll up, when that table view cell goes above the screen, it's actually being removed from memory. When it gets far enough up screen, it's being removed from memory, and then it's recycled back to the bottom of the table view, right? And so that's what's really nice about this DQ reusable cell is it really helps with the performance of your application because instead of creating new cells for every single contact, we're just reusing the same cell. We're recycling it, putting in the new data, and then as it runs off the screen, then we recycle it back and forth, okay? And so remember that when we created our initial table view cell, we gave it an identifier, okay? And so that's what's gonna be put in here. This reuse identifier is saying, okay, which cell, which template cell do you want me to cycle through, okay? And remember that we set that up as our contact cell, okay? And so if you don't remember your exact name, okay, because this name needs to be exact, go ahead and go back to your storyboard, open up your attributes inspector, and make sure that the identifier is the same here as it is in your table view controller. Okay, so contact cell, I'm gonna copy and paste just to make sure. Okay, yep, contact cell. Alrighty, so now that we've got that, we want each cell to have one of our contacts from our contact array, right? So I've got my cell property. Let's go ahead and let's get rid of this configure the cell code. I'm gonna create a new property that's gonna be contact, okay? So let contact, and then we're gonna do equal, or equals, And then I'm going to call my contacts array, okay? And I want to remove an object from my contacts array and put it into this cell, right? But remember, when we're calling an object in an array, we have to use subscript notation, right? And so previously we did like 0 or we did 1 or 2, but we want this to be dynamic with our array, almost like a for loop. When we had a for loop and it was assigning, going through each of those elements in the array. What's nice about this data source function that Apple is giving you is that you'll see that one of the parameters is an index path. So we can actually use that index path in our subscript notation, okay? So what I'm going to do is I want my contact to be equal to the name that is at the given index path, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and pass in index path here. And then I actually want it to be if we just do index path, you'll see that it says cannot subscript a value of type string with an index of type index path, okay? So the way that we can get the numerical value out of this index path is if I do dot row, okay? And so if I do dot row, you'll see that this is of type int, okay? So now, just like we were using 0, 1, 2, or 3 when we were pulling out objects from our array previously, we're using this parameter that this data source function gives us of index path dot row, okay? So that's going to line up perfectly. So it's going to say, okay, go into my array. What's the index path of this? Okay, that's going to be the first cell. What's the index path of this? Second cell. What's the index path of this? Third cell, okay? So now that we've got our contact object, we need to update the cell's label, okay? Because we want it to actually now say the name, okay? Because right now cell and contact aren't connected at all. So now we need to set them up. So I'm going to call my cell property here, and I'm going to do dot notation and see what they give me, okay? So every cell has an accessory view, a background view, a content view. Well, I want to change the label to it, okay? So you can see that there's this detail text label property here, but remember that we chose a basic cell, okay? So it doesn't have a detailed text label. It just has a main label. So let me search through all of my label options, and you'll see that we have accessibility label, detail text label, okay? So text label is just the basic label that you saw on the left of in our main.storyboard. That's just the text label, okay? If we had set up a detailed text label would be the label that's on the right, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do cell.textlabel.text, okay, is going to be equal to my contact, okay? So cell.textlabel.text is equal to my contact right here. Okay, is everyone with me thus far? Any questions or concerns before we move on? Cool. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. So I'm going to run this on an iPhone 10. I'll hit play here. Cross my fingers that we didn't miss anything. View controller is unreachable because it has no entry points and no identifier. Forget about that. If you got that warning, don't worry about it for now. It's just talking about this, that I've got like this floating view controller here, and the app doesn't know how to get to it yet, but we don't need it right now. So go ahead and open up your simulator. We bring it on over here. Okay, awesome. So there's our table view with all of the different names in my array. Okay, does everyone have this? Did anyone not get that? I want to make sure that we're all caught up. Okay, if anyone doesn't have it, what issues do you see or what errors came up? Still opening, okay, might take a second to launch. You didn't get the contact cell title. Is that a question of what's the point of the contact cell title, or? Okay. Issues? Any other issues, or are we good to move forward? Okay. I will take your silence as we're all good. Oh, how do I rename the cell? Oh, okay. Yeah. So if you didn't rename the cell, go ahead and go back to main.storyboard, select the cell in the table view controller, and then there's an identifier right here that you can set. Okay, so I set this to contact cell. Okay, so go ahead and make sure that you give that cell an identifier, and make sure that that is the same identifier as what you have here in the DQ reusable cell with identifier, contact cell. Okay, so if we open our app back up, you can see that clicking on these cells doesn't do anything, right? Because we haven't set up a detail view controller yet. Okay, we had another question come through. Can I explain the index path a bit more? It is just keeping track of what number cell we are looking at currently. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. That the index path is pretty much just like an identifier or a numerical value that's assigning like an index path to an element within an array, right? So if you think of like the way that we did for loops, think of it like it's going through each of the elements in the array and assigning an index path to each of them. And so it's saying, hey, you're going to be first in the list. Hey, you're going to be second. Hey, you're going to be third. Hey, you're going to be fourth. And so then we can use that index path to set up our cell and say, okay, who was supposed to be first? Who was supposed to be second? Who was supposed to be third? Who was supposed to be fourth? Okay. And so we can call indexPath.row, which essentially just gives us the integer value of that so that we can use that in subscript notation in our contacts array, right? So give me the indexPath.row is give me the integer value of the index path of that element in the array, okay? So hopefully that helps clear that up a little bit. Okay, so we've got our two table view data source methods set up. Let's go ahead and we need to set up our view controller, okay? So you've probably seen in a lot of apps when you navigate between different views, sometimes it will like slide in from the right or sometimes it will slide up from the bottom. Those are different ways of presenting new view controllers, okay? And oftentimes when you select something and it goes to a detail view, you'll see that it has a back button in the top left, right? You can tap the back button and that will take you back to your original spot. So Apple has made something for us. It's really nice. It's called a UI navigation controller. And a UI navigation controller pretty much sets up that whole view hierarchy for us. So if I navigate from one controller to the other, it will create a back button for us to take us back. Okay, so the navigation controller kind of keeps track of where the user is in what's called a stack of views. And then it adds buttons accordingly to navigate through that stack, okay? So again, we call it a stack of views. So a navigation controller manages a stack of views. And whenever we add a view controller to the stack, that is called pushing to the stack, okay? And then whenever we go back, we pop the view from the stack, okay? So push and pop are the ways to think of it, okay? So I want to set up a navigation controller so that I can navigate from this table view controller to our detail view controller. Okay, so let's go back into storyboard. Okay, and we've got this view controller here. And our navigation controller, we want it to be at the very beginning. It's going to be like our initial view controller. Okay, and the first view that we see within the navigation controller is going to be our table view controller, which is called our root view controller, Okay, so the root view controller is the view controller that is embedded right on top of the navigation controller. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to select my table view controller here, and if we go up to we want to, sorry, I'm not even thinking right. Okay, we go up to editor. Okay, so let's go to editor, and then we're going to go to embed in, and then you'll see navigation controller. Okay, because we want to embed this table view controller in a navigation controller so that I can start moving to different view controllers from there. Okay, you also see that you have the option to do a tab bar controller. So like Instagram and Facebook, they both use tab bar controllers to navigate through. But a navigation controller is just like a more basic one. So let's do a navigation controller. Okay, so now you see that as we embedded that in a navigation controller, the navigation controller became the initial view controller. And you can see that now there's a connection. And this is this connection is root view controller. Okay, there's a connection between our nav controller and our table view controller. Okay, and the table view controller is the root view controller of the navigation controller. Okay, so we don't need to add anything more to our navigation controller. We don't need to do anything in code. All we needed to do was just embed this table view controller into the navigation controller. Okay, so now that we have that, you'll see that it added a little bar here on top. Okay, and this is kind of the navigation controller's domain. They have this little bar. That's where they can put the back button if they need to. You can also put like a title of a view controller. So if you click on this bar here, you'll see that it selects what's called the navigation item, and I can give that a title. So let's go ahead and name that contacts. Okay, just to make it clear what this table view is showing us. So we've got contacts here. And if you want to make it look kind of more like the Contacts app, if I select my navigation controller here, there's this, where is it? I don't know where it went. Normally there's this large title. Is that what it is? No. There's one that you can like set it to prefer large content. I thought it was in the nav controller, but maybe I'm sure. Anyway, it's not important. There are lots of different settings that you can mess with here on your nav. Oh, is it navigation bar? Oh, there it is. Yeah, if you click on the navigation bar, you can click on this prefers large titles. So when we select that, that should have made our contacts a little bit bigger. Oh, automatic. There we go. Contacts. Humongous. Okay. Okay. So yes, as Spencer said, it's in the navigation controller's navigation bar. Thanks, Spencer. Okay. Funny story. Spencer here, he runs the full-time course. He's one of the instructors there, and he was actually my mentor. He taught me pretty much everything I know about coding. So go Spencer. Still teaching me today. Okay. Alrighty. So now that we've got our contacts, we want to be able to transition into our view controller here, right? So what we can do is we can use this navigation controller to our advantage, and we can create what's called a segue, okay? And a segue is essentially just an indicator that we give to a view or a button or a table view cell that says, hey, when a user taps this, present this view controller, okay? So this is how we create a segue. It's pretty similar to when you created outlets and IB actions. If we click on our table view cell and hold down we hold down Control and drag from our table view cell to our new view controller, okay, you'll see that the view controller will highlight blue. And then you'll see that it gives you a list of different segues that you can use, okay? In this example, we're gonna use a show segue, which transitions in from left to right, okay? So the new view controller is gonna come in from the right, okay? And but you have these different options. Present modally comes up from the bottom, and then you can set up different segues. But we're just going to do a show segue here. Okay, and then you'll see that as soon as we connected that, this view controller got access to the navigation controller. Okay, so we added it to the navigation controller stack. Okay, so now the navigation controller can manage all of our different views here. Okay, so I could also here I could set up we could add like a navigation item if we wanted to, because it has the navigation bar, so we could add a navigation item up to here, and we could say detail or contact detail, okay? And you'll see that it added that back button for us, if we want, so that when we get from our table view controller to the view controller, we can also go back to our contacts, okay? So I am going way too slow because we are running out of time, okay? So we're gonna need to add one more thing to our contact detail view controller, and that's going to be a label, right? Because we want it to include a name. So go ahead and put that label there into your view controller, and we need to give it some constraints, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna set it 8, 8, and 8, okay? So I just want it to be up along the top and add those constraints here. Okay, so now that we've got our view controller set up, we need to create a file to manage the code that's going on in here, right? So go ahead and over in your project navigator, Command N, and we're gonna create a new Cocoa Touch class file. And this isn't going to be a table view controller, right? It's just a view controller, so I'm gonna get rid of the table part of this. And let's call this detail view controller. And we'll hit next and hit create. And now we've got a detail view controller, okay? I don't need any of this commented out code. I also don't need the did receive memory warning, okay? And let's get rid of this, okay? So now let's go ahead and let's connect up our storyboard with our file, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and we can open up our assistant editor so that we can have side by side. And then I want to open up my storyboard, okay? And I need to bring this label in here as an outlet, okay? And so if we go ahead and we try to drag from the outlet over, you'll see that it doesn't let us, okay? And that's because we haven't set the class on this new view controller yet, okay? So we're gonna click on the view controller and we're going to set the class as our detail view controller, okay? All right, we've had a couple of questions come through. What kind of file is the new detail view controller? So it's gonna be the subclass is gonna be UI view controller, okay? As far as the class, you need to assign the class here in storyboard to detail view controller after you create it. How did I set the constraints? I only set 3 constraints up. I just needed a left, right, and top constraint. So if you click on your label here, and the screen is too small, you can't see all of the visual stuff here. Get rid of this. If you click on the constraint button here, the little TIE fighter, then, oh, sorry, click on label first, then click on the TIE fighter, and then you can set up the constraints here. I just set my left, right, or my leading, trailing, and top constraints to 8. Okay. Alrighty, so now that we've got this, we need to create our outlet, okay? And let's go ahead and just name this as name label and connect it up. So we've got our outlet in here. Okay, and then we also know that we're gonna have a property on this class that's gonna be one of our contacts, right? So let's go ahead and set up a variable here called contact, and we know that it's gonna be of type string, and it's gonna be a string optional, okay? Okay, just had a quick question about how to add the details view to the nav controller. We do that by creating a segue, okay? So click on the cell, and then control drag from the cell over to your new view, and then you're going to select show as your selection segue. Okay? Alrighty. Okay, and I'm going to do my best to be done by 7, but I also want you guys to all be caught up. And so if I go a little bit over, forgive me, but it'll be worth it. So, okay. All right, so we've got a contact variable, which we're going to use a little bit later, because remember, we are going to be passing a contact into this view controller. And then we have our name label outlet, okay? And so we know that when our view does eventually load, we're going to want our name label, so our visual interface element, our name label.text, to be equal to whatever the contact is that we pass over, okay? So name label.text is equal to contact, okay? So that begs the question then, how do we pass the contact from one controller over to the other, okay? So when I tap on the table view cell, how does it know which contact to import or to show details for, okay? So that's going to be done back over in our contacts table view controller, okay? Get rid of the assistant editor here. Okay, you'll see that we got a bunch of other cookie cutter code here. Can edit row at. This is for like deleting cells. We don't need any of this. So go ahead and delete all the code until you get to navigation in the commented out code, okay? Because this is something that we're going to use, okay? So I'm going to uncomment this by getting rid of the /* and we have this nifty method called prepare for segue, okay? So a prepare for segue is a method that is called anytime that a segue is called, okay? So remember that we created a segue from our table view controller to our detail view controller, okay? So anytime we transition between the two, this method, prepare for segue, will be called. And this is really nice because it gives us a chance, it gives us a little in where we can pass in some bits of information, okay? So that before it actually segues, it's going to toss the information over to the new view controller, okay? So now we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna prepare for segue, and we need to make sure that we only pass over the information if we're using the right segue. Okay, in this case, we only have one segue, but we want to make sure that we're using the right segue. Okay, so I'm going to create a conditional here, and we're going to say if our segue, and remember this segue is the parameter. Okay, so the segue that was initialized in the interface element, it's going to pass over to this prepare for segue. So we're going to ask that segue, we're going to say if the segue dot identifier is equal to, okay, and so we actually need to create a segue identifier, just like we created an identifier for our table view cell. We need to give the segue its own identifier. So go back to your storyboard here, and we're going to click on our segue that's in between contacts and contact detail, this little arrow here. And that's our segue, and we're going to give it an identifier, okay? And let's call it detail segue. Detail segue. And go ahead and copy that so that you make sure that you call the right one. And go back over to your table view controller. And then let's go back to this prepare for segue method. If segue.identifier, so the identifier that we just set, is equal to detail segue, okay, so make sure that we're calling in the right segue, then what do we want to do, okay? Well, first we need to create an instance of our detail view controller, okay? And because a segue could lead to something or it couldn't, like say I put detail segue 2, that might not exist, right? And so we actually need to unwrap our view controller, okay? That's what's called our segue destination, okay? So segue has an identifier and a destination. So the identifier is the name of the segue, and then the destination is what view controller it goes to, okay? And the app at this point doesn't know if that destination really exists or not, okay? So it's actually something that's optional, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna do we can do if let, but I'm gonna do, let's do something called guard let. It's very similar to an if let, but a guard let will help us to unwrap this optional. So again, we're gonna give the name of we're gonna give our view controller that we're going to create an instance of, we're gonna give it a name, a property name, which we'll just say detail VC. And then we're gonna say guard let detail VC equal our segue dot destination. Okay, so our detail view controller is going to be whatever the destination is of our segue. Sorry. Okay, so guard let detail view controller equals segue dot destination, and then I'm actually going to cast this. So we haven't learned about this, but we're going to do as question mark. And then we're going to type in our class, which was detail view controller, okay? So at this point, the app is going to know that our detail view controller, our segue, is going to be of type detail view controller. And the reason we do that is so that we can start accessing some of the properties on our detail view controller. Remember, we have that contact property on our detail view controller that we're going to need to pass information to, okay? So we need an instance of detail view controller, okay? And then we're also going to create an index path, okay? So let index path, and we want to pass over the name of the cell that we selected, right? So Apple gives us a really nice method on table view to give us the index path of whatever the user selected, okay? So my index path is going to be table view dot index path for selected row. My apologies, okay? So our index path is going to be for whatever cell the user tapped, okay? And then we're going to go ahead and say, with a guard let, it's really nice because you can unwrap multiple optionals, okay? So with a comma here, I did let detail VC equals segue destination, and comma let index path. So this is actually going to unwrap both of them. And then if either of those are nil, I have an else statement, and I'm going to say else return. Okay, I don't want it to perform the segue if detail VC, if the segue destination is nil, or if the index path is nil. I don't want it to segue over. Okay. So now that we have those, now that we have access to our detail view controller, I'm going to call my detail view controller, and I'm going to access a property on it, okay? And so you can see that if we do dot notation, that will give us a list of the properties. And remember that we created that contact property, okay? So my detail VC dot contact property is going to be equal to my contacts array. And now we can pass in the right index path, right? Because we created this index path property. So I'm going to do the same thing like we did previously, index path dot row, okay? So pretty similar to what we did up in cell for row at, where we had that index path. We're going to call index path dot row. Because down here I don't get access to a parameter of an index path, I have to create my own index path, okay? So I have index path here is equal to whatever row the user selected, okay? Sorry guys, I know we're going through this really quickly, okay? So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and run our code, okay? So we put that in the prepare for segue because we're saying, hey, before you move to the new view controller, I need to set up a few things. I need to configure a few things. Whatever your contact property is, I want to set it with this contact, okay? So let's go ahead, and we've got our we've got our table view here. You can see we've got our nav controller now that's showing us that we're on our contacts page. And I'm going to click on Johnny Hicks. Okay. And if I tap on that, it's going to hit the prepare for segue. It's going to say, hey, user tapped on row number 1. What's at row number 1? Johnny Hicks is at row number 1. Okay. And so then it's going to say, Johnny Hicks is at row number 1. Hey, detail view controller, set up your contact property is going to be equal to Johnny Hicks. Okay. And then when the view loads, we're going to set our name label.text, our outlet, to whatever our contact equals. Okay. So we're going to say, hey, I'm passing over Johnny Hicks to you. Now present that in the name label.text. Okay. So let's go back over to our simulator. You can see we've got Christopher. We can tap on Noah. We can tap here on Jonathan. We've got Bossbank and Shalita. Okay. All right, guys. I know that we're over time, but I want to answer any questions. Are you guys behind? Are you with me? What questions do you have before we sign off today for our last day of class? Was everybody able to get that to work? Hopefully. Awesome. Let's see, I don't get names in the second screen when I tap on the names from the first screen in my app. Okay. Jonathan, okay, so make sure in your detail view controller, make sure that you have this property here for contact, right? Because we're going to be passing a contact over. And then make sure that you have an outlet for your name label, okay? And then make sure in viewed load that you're setting the name label.text, so this outlet that you created here, you're setting the text of that label to your contact property, okay? And then make sure in your table view controller that you're in your prepare for segue, that you're passing the contact from your contacts array over to the contact property in your detail view controller, okay? And for those of you that are farther behind, this is being recorded and will be posted if you want to review it. I'm also happy to stay online a little bit longer for those of you who need some extra help. So if you do need some extra help, stay on board with us, and I can answer any of your questions because I want to make sure all of you have it. Okay, but let me post your homework here. It's going to give you more practice. And it's an app called Swift Vocabulary. Okay, so you're going to be making a new app. It's going to be pretty similar to what we did today. Okay. And I will post this here in the chat, as well as in Slack. Homework. Okay, so your homework has been posted in Slack as well. Alrighty, guys. Well, that is the last day of class. I have really enjoyed my time with you. It's been a lot of fun to go through all of this with you. You know, again, programming is awesome, guys, and I would highly recommend doing a full-time course and really becoming a programmer because man, I go to work every day and it's just so fun. I get to work on new projects. I get to solve new problems. I get to learn a lot of cool things. You know, I've learned how to develop a watch app, and I've worked with Siri Kit to enable my app to use Siri. You know, I've done tons of different stuff. There's always new stuff to learn with coding. Okay, so that's what makes programming so fun, is that as Apple continues to develop new tools, as developers we get access to those tools and we get to put them into our apps. Okay. I've also had the opportunity to create an AR app, which was a lot of fun, learning how to make a game and to use 3D objects in augmented reality space. I mean, guys, it's so fun. I tell everybody that they should be programmers, and I realize not everybody really is interested into it, and I'm kind of a nerd because of that. But I would highly recommend it. And Lambda is a great school, and they'll help you become successful programmers. And it's really nice because you won't need to put in a bunch of capital at the beginning, but instead you can learn to become a developer, actually land a job, and then start paying off your education. So that reverse model is really nice because sometimes people don't have a lot of money to pay for code camps in school. And so you can become a programmer for free and then start paying your tuition thereafter. So thanks again so much, guys. Feel free to watch this after if you need to review. And then again, for those of you who got behind, I'm going to stay on for a little bit longer if you have any specific questions. Okay, thanks, guys. Have a good weekend. Okay.